Hello, everyone. I'm Kevin Gostola, the managing editor for Shadowproof.com, also the curator of the Dissenter newsletter. A quick reminder before we start this video, please go to thedissenter.org and become a subscriber. If you're not a subscriber already, this is a newsletter for updates and coverage of whistleblower stories that you can't find in the establishment media, much like the story that we're going to cover today. So, Reality Winner, NSA Whistleblower Reality Winner was released from U.S. prison, from a U.S. prison back in June, and she lived on home confinement for the past 3 months, and then she had her ankle bracelet finally taken off, and she started probation on November 23rd. And for the first time, she spoke at this conference that was hosted by the Disruption Network Lab in Germany. They had a Whistleblowing For Change conference, and the film United States versus Reality Winner, directed by Sonia Kennebeck, was screened at the conference. And after, there was a question and answer portion in which Reality Winner and her mother, Billy Winner Davis, joined, and they participated. And Reality, we got to hear from her for the first time. This is the first public event that she participated in since completing her prison sentence. She also did an interview that appeared in Rolling Stone where she made some comments, but this was her opportunity to actually address and have an exchange with people in the audience who asked her questions. And not all of them were serious questions, or not all of them were bleak and downbeat, but some of them dealt with some very serious issues, such as the trauma and stress that came from living under home confinement for the past 3 months. So I have a couple clips queued up for this video, and I wanted to share them. So here's the first one, and this comes again from the Whistleblowing For Change conference.
But I just wanted to say, ask Reality if she might want to comment, because I know, I understand that you may not have seen the documentary, which is fine. You've had a lot to deal with, and just to return to be with your family. You were, I think, released to home confinement in June. Is that right? Have you been back with your mom since June, or have you only been back with her and Gary since this week?
I've actually been on home confinement since June 9th with an ankle monitor and constant phone calls and threats of escape. I ventured too far into my living room one day and they told me I was escape status. Just absolutely nerve-wracking the way they could levy these threats but then never document it. So we had actually no accountability or ways to address how we could prevent the constant trauma from reoccurring, because then I would speak to like the director of the halfway house or my case manager, and they'd say, well, they never heard about it. Meanwhile, I've had 2 panic attacks and I'm physically ill from the stress because they told me I could be charged with escape the night before. So yes, I have been home, but I haven't really been home. It's been a constant sort of pressure on my family. We've had back-to-back drug tests every other week for 5 months, but I haven't had any approval to drive. So that means, mom or dad has to take me to go get my drug test, and it's 100 miles round trip. So it is a huge inconvenience, and you would think, okay, well, the feds want to test me and they want to do it effectively. Come to my house. Come get a urine sample at my house. It should be on them, but instead it fell to me. The ankle monitor buzzed constantly, regardless of where I was. It never really worked. I went grocery shopping twice in 5 months because every time I got approval, they would suddenly pull approval because For some reason, if we were on home confinement and they felt like COVID was getting bad, we were no longer allowed to go to restaurants or go grocery shopping. So I only went out to eat, I believe, 2 or 3 times in 5 months. Um, it just so happened COVID would tend to get bad whenever we had family down for the weekend. And so they would belatedly tell me that's why my social passes were disapproved the day of. It was just a lot of coincidences like that. So on Tuesday, this past Tuesday, I had my ankle monitor cut off and I was released to go meet with my probation officer. And he tells me for the next 3 years, courtesy of my district in Georgia that sentenced me, I have a 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. curfew, 365 days a year for the next 3 years. That means no overnight trips, no matter what. No late night movies, nothing. It also means I have to have special permission to leave work earlier than 6 a.m. I cannot leave the Southern District of Texas, but even if I could, I would have to keep it within a 5-hour drive so I can make it back in time for that 10 p.m. curfew. So they have, without saying so directly, have effectively disabled me from any type of meaningful travel. That was a really crushing blow. You know, I have a godson in Wisconsin that I would like to go see. My sister lives in North Carolina, and I just thought that maybe for the first time in 4.5 years, I could bear some of the burden for my family and go see them. But now it's just being confined to this local area for the next 3 years makes it really hard to feel how is this a step forward? We have been using these same 2 clauses from my plea agreement to sort of guide the way to how I can speak to the media and speak out on my own behalf and finally advocate for myself and start over. And on Tuesday, somehow this probation officer's interpretation, even though the word interview is not stated, not one time in my court, my court restrictions for probation, he just kept saying, well, as long as you don't do interviews, it'll be fine. So I don't know what to do moving forward. I don't know what the ramifications of even a discussion like this will be. So I'm happy to be here. I'm happy to be heard. But it just seemed like damned if I do, damned if I don't. If I stay silent, the abuse will continue. And if I speak out, the abuse will continue.
That's Reality Winner talking at the Whistleblowing for Change conference. And again, this is the first time that we're hearing from Reality Winner since going to prison, really since hearing the audio from the FBI's interrogation, which was featured in the United States versus Reality Winner documentary. Sonia Kennebeck managed to get the audio released through the Freedom of Information Act. And you hear from Reality about COVID and the Bureau of Prisons. It's important to note that Reality survived a outbreak, I think multiple outbreaks within the Federal Medical Center Carswell, where she was incarcerated, this women's prison that she was incarcerated in during her sentence. And she tried to obtain release, tried to be released to home confinement during her sentence early, before June of this year, so that she would not be sick. She said in a submission to a federal court that she had conditions that made her especially vulnerable to COVID-19. And in the end, this was rejected as an argument for her release by a district court as well as an appeals court, turned down her effort to be released to home confinement. And so the idea that the Bureau of Prisons cares about the well-being and isn't using this pandemic as a means to impose further control on prisoners is one that is hard to fathom. It's hard to believe that Bureau of Prisons officials have realities and other prisoners' best interests at heart, that they do actually care for these people. And when you look at the way they used COVID during her home confinement, it matches up with a lot of what we've seen in the prison system during the past nearly 2 years, this nearly 2 year long pandemic. The travel restrictions imposed do not match up with what we know from CIA whistleblower John Kiriaku's case. And he was there, he was at the Whistleblowing For Change conference. He spoke to the audience about his probation, about what happened while he was at the halfway house for 3 months during the end of his prison sentence. And he basically shared how he was able to overcome these restrictions that are now being imposed on Reality Winner, the effort to control her. But I know that he was able to apply and go on trips, and that didn't become a barrier. He was able to apply. And it doesn't seem clear that in this district in Texas, that Reality is going to be able to do the same if she would like to travel. She should be able to apply and get permission to go visit these family members who she mentioned. And however, it seems like the Southern District of Georgia is possibly going to impose a restriction that it means that essentially she is in a kind of prison. She may be out of Carswell, no longer in the custody of the Bureau of Prisons at Carswell, but she is in some kind of custody. She is in a restricted area that she cannot leave. She cannot leave this zone, this jurisdiction in Texas. Now, also, there's the issue of her First Amendment rights as she talks about the plea agreement and whether she can speak to the press and what she could talk to the press about. Now, we know that because it's a classified document, she could not talk about what she released to the public. And she cannot share her opinion about what she released to the public. Can she talk about the prosecution? Can she describe what it was like to go through her interrogation? Is she able to describe going through the proceedings, the legal proceedings, being incarcerated? Is she able to speak to the press about all of these matters, or will a probation officer restrict her from being able to talk to journalists? Now, something that I think is going to have to be tested in order to see if that is actually something the probation officer is going to enforce. We don't know what kind of retaliation may come from participating in this Whistleblowing For Change conference, but I can say that her free speech rights are being curtailed here. And the question of whether she can exercise them is one that Reality Winner actually returned to at the end later on in this conference. So here's a second clip.
Just some of your voice in the documentary about this unknown that you had to live with, the unknowns, and even once you had your plea deal arranged, you were looking at, as you said, no strings attached. I'm not sure if that felt better to know sort of what the parameters were, or if it still felt like an unknown to you. Is that sort of what you find the hardest? Is just living with things that you don't really have control over?
That is absolutely what this is the parameters of my plea deal are actually incredibly vague, and they don't actually list what the repercussions are legally for even coming close to this line that's like a mile thick. It's almost, like I said, my probation officer is looking at the same conditions that I've had legal scholars looking at for the past year to prepare for this time that I'm no longer in the Bureau of Prisons. And somehow he reads all these lines and his summation is no interviews. Does that mean I can't do an interview about CrossFit? I'm a CrossFit coach. Why can't I talk about CrossFit? Why can't I be a public spokesperson for rescue horses? he doesn't seem to understand that.
Yeah.
But the ball is in his court because there's no restrictions on what he can do to me if he can remand me into custody at any point. And because we can't seem to get my own country to pay attention to what's happening to me, who knows how long it'll be before I can get released. There's not going to be any public support or public pressure like in high profile cases. Nobody's coming to help me out. There's not going to be any justice. It'll just be being silenced all over again and being alone and being in conditions where I can't manage my mental illness anymore. That's what I face every day because they change the rules every day.
It all sounds very grim to listen to Reality give her very honest, open uh, feelings about what it is like to be in this portion of her prison sentence. It's the part that most people neglect. We all have the ability to recognize that somebody remains incarcerated when they are in prison. I think we know that home confinement carries its restrictions. I don't think people really understand probation because they have this illusion that somehow you're having freedom of movement, that you can re-enter life, that the restrictions are basically just, them monitoring and making sure you don't reoffend and repeat any of the crimes or engage in any illegal activity while you are out of prison. And then after 3 years, they accept that you have successfully re-entered society, so to speak. And it's disappointing that she doesn't believe there are more people out there who would support her. And they are going to continue to push for a pardon because 3 more years of having these restrictions on her travel and her ability to speak is unconscionable and something that is very burdensome and makes it difficult for her to resume her life. And she's already lost 4 to 5 years that she will never be able to get back. They are good years. They are years when you are young, that nobody wants to be deprived of being able to live fully. And what she did was an act of conscience, and she never deserved to be prosecuted under the Espionage Act. And so to continue going through with this probation, it's something that we all should hope can be ended. And we all need to be part of this push to win probation for reality winners. So anytime we hear that there are these shenanigans being committed by the probation officer or anything that is questionable by the Bureau of Prisons, we should be there for a reality winner, because people like her who act on their conscience are people who deserve support. And reality winner has free speech rights. She served her time in prison and she is out now, and she should be able to, at minimum, do interviews about rescue horses, or be able to do interviews about CrossFit, or to talk about her pets, or to talk about art. She's an artist. She should be able to talk about doing artwork if she would like. She should be able to go out in the community and talk to anyone, any local press. She should be able to give interviews on even the most innocent topics like kitty cats or dogs, or whatever she would like to talk about with someone. It doesn't have to be on her case. So with that, I thank you for tuning into this video. Let me put up the banner once more for thedissenter.org. This is where you can go to support this independent journalism on whistleblowing. Become a subscriber to The Dissenter and stay tuned for updates on Reality Winner's case, as well as other whistleblower cases. And we'll be back soon with another video.